The Roman Empire at its height stretched from the misty shores of Britain to the sun-baked sands of Egypt, encompassing a world so vast and complex that it defies easy comprehension. In the 2nd century of the Common Era, during the reign of Emperor Marcus Aurelius, Rome had become not just a city, but the beating heart of civilization itself. The capital alone housed over 1 million souls, making it the largest urban center the world had ever known. Life in this ancient metropolis moved to rhythms entirely different from our modern existence. There were no clocks as we know them today, no electric lights to extend the day, no mechanized transportation to hurry people along cobblestone streets. Instead, time was measured by the sun's journey across the sky, by the calling of roosters at dawn, by the gradual lighting of oil lamps as dusk settled over the 7 hills. The city awakened each morning with the sound of wooden wheels rolling over stone, the calls of merchants hawking their wares from handcarts, the gentle lowing of cattle being driven to market. Citizens emerged from their homes into streets that were narrow and winding, some barely wide enough for 2 people to pass comfortably. The air would be filled with the mingled scents of baking bread, burning incense from household shrines, and the earthier aromas of human activity in a densely populated urban environment. Roman society was structured in ways that seem almost alien to modern sensibilities, yet operated with a logic and efficiency that sustained an empire for over 1,000 years. At the apex stood the emperor, surrounded by an elaborate court of senators, advisors, and administrators. Below them were the wealthy patrician families, descendants of Rome's founding fathers, who lived in grand villas with marble floors, painted walls, and private gardens filled with exotic plants from across the empire. The middle classes consisted of merchants, craftsmen, and small landowners who formed the backbone of Roman economic life. These were the people who ran the bakeries and metalworking shops, who traded in silk from China and spices from India, who built the aqueducts and roads that connected distant provinces to the capital. Their homes might have several rooms, decorated with simple frescoes and furnished with wooden tables, chairs, and beds stuffed with wool or feathers. At the base of the social pyramid were the slaves, whose labor made possible much of Roman prosperity. Yet even slavery in Rome was more complex than might be imagined. Some slaves were highly educated Greeks who served as tutors and secretaries, living in comfortable quarters and earning the respect of their masters. Others might be craftsmen whose skills were so valued that they could eventually purchase their freedom and establish their own workshops. The Roman day began before sunrise, when the head of the household would rise and perform his morning ablutions. Water would be brought by servants in clay pitchers, poured into bronze basins for washing. The Romans were fastidious about cleanliness, though their understanding of hygiene differed from ours. They believed that bathing should be done in hot water, followed by applications of olive oil mixed with various herbs and perfumes. Breakfast was typically a simple affair consisting of bread, perhaps with honey or olive oil, accompanied by watered wine or water mixed with vinegar. The Romans considered pure water somewhat suspect, believing it could carry disease, so even children drank diluted wine with their meals. The bread itself was made from wheat grown in the fertile regions of Egypt and North Africa, shipped to Rome in massive grain vessels that could carry several hundred tons of cargo. After the morning meal, the household would begin its daily activities. For the wealthy, this might involve receiving clients who came seeking favors or assistance, a ritual that reinforced social hierarchies while providing a form of social safety net. These morning receptions, called salutations, took place in the atrium of the house, a central courtyard open to the sky with a rectangular pool to catch rainwater. The atrium was typically the most impressive room in a Roman house, with painted walls depicting mythological scenes or garden landscapes, intended to create an illusion of space and natural beauty. The floor might be decorated with intricate mosaics showing geometric patterns or scenes from daily life, each tiny piece of colored stone, carefully placed by skilled artisans who had learned their craft through years of apprenticeship. Women of wealthy families had their own routines, though these were more restricted by social convention. A Roman matron might spend her morning supervising the household slaves, checking on the preparation of meals, and overseeing the education of her children. Education was highly valued in Roman society, particularly for boys who would be expected to participate in public life as adults. The concept of privacy as we understand it barely existed in ancient Rome. Families lived in close quarters, servants moved freely through living spaces, and even wealthy homes were designed for entertaining guests rather than private family life. This communal approach to living extended beyond individual households to the broader community, where much of daily life took place in public spaces like the forum, the baths, and various temples scattered throughout the city. Roman religion was woven into every aspect of daily life, from small household shrines dedicated to ancestral spirits to grand temples honoring the major gods of the pantheon. Jupiter ruled the heavens, Mars governed war, Venus presided over love and beauty, while hundreds of lesser deities watched over specific aspects of human activity. There were gods for doorways, gods for storage rooms, gods for the boundaries between properties. The marketplace or forum was where much of Roman commercial and social life unfolded. Vendors would arrive before dawn to set up their stalls, arranging their goods on wooden tables or simply spreading them on cloth laid directly on the stone pavement. The variety of merchandise available was staggering, reflecting the vast reach of Roman trade networks. Silk from China, amber from the Baltic, ivory from Africa, pearls from the Persian Gulf, all could be found in the shops and stalls of Rome. As the first light of dawn touched the red-tiled roofs of Rome, the city began its slow awakening like a vast organism stirring to life. The air was cool and fresh, carrying the scent of dew-dampened earth from the gardens and courtyards scattered throughout the urban landscape. In the distance, the sound of temple bells could be heard, calling the faithful to morning prayers, their bronze voices echoing off the marble facades of public buildings. Our story focuses on Marcus Flavius Antonius, a man whose profession required the most delicate balance of discretion, artistry, and social navigation. In modern terms, we might call him an event planner, but in the context of 2nd century Rome, his role was far more nuanced and culturally significant. He was a coordinator of elaborate private gatherings for Rome's elite, celebrations that required months of preparation and attention to countless details. Marcus lived in a comfortable house on the Aventine Hill, one of Rome's 7 hills, and Cophos lived in a comfortable house on the Aventine Hill, a neighborhood favored by successful merchants and minor officials. His home was built around a central courtyard, following the traditional Roman architectural plan that had evolved over centuries. The morning light filtered through the opening in the roof, casting geometric shadows across the mosaic floor that depicted dolphins swimming among stylized waves, a design that evoked the cool tranquility of the sea. The house awakened gradually, beginning with the soft footsteps of household slaves moving through the corridors, their leather sandals whispering against the polished stone floors. The first task was always to light the oil lamps that would provide illumination throughout the day, as many rooms in Roman houses received little natural light. These lamps were works of art in themselves, molded from clay and decorated with intricate designs, burning olive oil that filled the air with a faint, pleasant fragrance. Marcus rose from his bed, which consisted of a wooden frame strung with leather straps and topped with a mattress stuffed with wool and feathers. The Romans slept on their sides, as they believed this position was healthiest for digestion and breathing. His bedroom walls were painted with scenes of pastoral life, showing shepherds tending their flocks in idealized countryside settings, a common theme that brought the beauty of nature into urban living spaces. The morning routine began with personal hygiene, which the Romans elevated almost to the level of ritual. A slave brought a basin of warm water mixed with herbs and aromatic oils, along with a strigil, the curved bronze tool used to scrape oil and dirt from the skin. This process was methodical and meditative, requiring patience and attention to detail that set the tone for the entire day. After cleansing himself, Marcus dressed in his tunic, a simple woolen garment that fell to his knees, followed by his toga if he planned to conduct official business. The toga was a complex garment, essentially a large semicircular piece of cloth that required skill to drape properly. Its arrangement communicated social status, political affiliation, and personal taste, making it a form of wearable communication that every Roman citizen learned to read instinctively. The morning meal was prepared in the kitchen, a room that would seem surprisingly small and simple by modern standards. Cooking was done over an open fire, with pots and pans made of bronze or clay. The Romans were skilled cooks despite their limited technology, creating complex dishes through careful combinations of ingredients and cooking techniques passed down through generations of household slaves who specialized in culinary arts. Breakfast consisted of bread baked in the neighborhood bakery, olive oil pressed from trees growing on Marcus's country estate, honey collected from beehives maintained by rural slaves, and wine mixed with water in proportions that varied according to personal preference and the quality of the vintage. The bread was coarse by modern standards, but highly nutritious, made from wheat that retained much of its natural fiber and nutrients. As Marcus ate, he reviewed the day's schedule with his personal secretary, a Greek slave named Dionysius who had been educated in Athens before being captured in one of Rome's eastern campaigns. Dionysius was responsible for maintaining Marcus's correspondence, scheduling appointments, and keeping track of the countless details involved in organizing elaborate private celebrations for Rome's wealthy elite. The morning's first appointment was with Gaius Petronius, a wealthy senator who was planning a celebration to mark his son's coming-of-age ceremony. This was not merely a family gathering, but a significant social and political event that would be attended by dozens of influential Romans, each with their own expectations and requirements that must be carefully balanced. Marcus's reputation had been built over decades of successful events, each one adding to his network of contacts and deepening his understanding of Roman social dynamics. He knew which musicians were currently fashionable, which exotic ingredients could be obtained from which merchants, which combinations of guests would create interesting conversations without risking political conflicts that could embarrass his clients. The walk to Petronius's villa took Marcus through some of Rome's most elegant neighborhoods, where the houses grew larger and more elaborate as they climbed toward the Palatine Hill. The streets were paved with polygonal stones fitted together so precisely that they formed an almost smooth surface, designed to last for centuries while providing good drainage during the frequent Mediterranean rains. Along the way, Marcus passed various shops and workshops where artisans were already beginning their daily labor. Metalworkers hammered bronze into decorative vessels, their rhythmic pounding creating a percussive soundtrack to the morning's activities. Jewelers examined precious stones in the early light, selecting gems that would be set into rings and bracelets for wealthy customers. Textile workers operated looms that produced the fine woolen and linen fabrics essential to Roman fashion. The scents along the route created a complex olfactory map of the city. From bakeries came the warm aroma of fresh bread, mixed with the sharper smell of wood smoke from cooking fires. Perfume shops contributed clouds of exotic fragrances imported from distant provinces, while wine bars added the sweet, slightly acidic smell of fermented grapes to the urban bouquet. Marcus's trained eye took in details that less experienced observers might miss. He noticed which houses showed signs of recent renovation, indicating their owner's current financial status. He observed which streets were being repaired, suggesting possible traffic delays for future events. He noted seasonal changes in the types of goods being sold, information that would influence his recommendations for upcoming celebrations. Roman concept of time was fluid and contextual rather than precise and mechanical. Hours were longer in summer than in winter, since the Romans divided daylight into 12 equal parts regardless of the season's length. This meant that punctuality was measured more by social appropriateness than chronological precision, a system that worked well in a society where personal relationships were more important than abstract schedules. As Marcus approached Petronius's villa, he could see gardeners tending the elaborate landscaping that surrounded the building. Roman gardens were marvels of engineering and artistry, featuring geometric patterns of clipped hedges, fountains fed by the city's magnificent aqueduct system, and collections of exotic plants gathered from across the empire's vast territories. The villa of Gaius Petronius stood as a testament to the refined tastes and considerable wealth that characterized Rome's senatorial class. Built in the classical style that had evolved from Greek architectural principles, the building presented a facade of elegant columns and perfectly proportioned spaces that spoke of harmony, balance, and cultural sophistication. The morning sun struck the marble surfaces at angles calculated by skilled architects to create patterns of light and shadow that changed throughout the day. Marcus paused at the entrance to appreciate the craftsmanship of the bronze doors, which were decorated with scenes from Homer's Odyssey, rendered in relief so detailed that each figure seemed almost ready to step from the metal surface. This was not mere decoration, but a declaration of the owner's education and cultural values, communicating to visitors that this was a household where literature, philosophy, and the arts were treasured as highly as political power or commercial success. A doorkeeper, recognizing Marcus as an expected guest, opened the portal with the sort of practiced discretion that marked well-trained household staff throughout Rome. The entrance hall, or vestibulum, was designed to impress visitors while preparing them psychologically for the grandeur of the interior spaces beyond. Marble columns supported a ceiling painted with mythological scenes, while the floor featured a mosaic welcoming guests in both Latin and Greek, acknowledging the bilingual nature of Roman high culture. The atrium beyond was a masterpiece of domestic architecture, its central opening to the sky, creating a natural lighting system that illuminated the space with ever-changing patterns of brightness and shadow. The impluvium, the rectangular pool that collected rainwater, was lined with colorful tiles that depicted sea creatures swimming in stylized waves, their forms shimmering under the reflected light from above. Petronius emerged from his private study, dressed in a toga whose quality and arrangement immediately communicated his senatorial rank and considerable personal wealth. The fabric was wool so fine it seemed to flow like liquid, dyed with expensive purple obtained from murex shells harvested in the eastern Mediterranean. The way he wore the garment, with its complex folds arranged in precise patterns, demonstrated years of practice and the assistance of skilled slaves who understood the subtle language of Roman formal dress. The two men exchanged greetings according to established social protocols, their words carefully chosen to acknowledge each other's status, while expressing appropriate levels of respect and friendship. This verbal dance was as important as any written contract, establishing the framework within which their business relationship would operate and ensuring that both parties understood their mutual obligations and expectations. They moved to a reception room decorated with frescoes depicting garden scenes so realistic that the walls seemed to dissolve into distant landscapes. This technique, known as trompe-l'œil, was popular among wealthy Romans who wanted to create illusions of space and natural beauty within the confines of urban living. The painted gardens showed plants from various climates and regions, creating impossible but delightful combinations of flowers, trees, and decorative elements. Petronius explained the nature of the celebration he wished to organize. His eldest son, Marcus Petronius Maximus, was about to undergo the ceremony of toga virilis, marking his transition from childhood to adult citizenship. This was one of the most significant moments in a young Roman's life, comparable to modern graduation ceremonies, but with far deeper social and legal implications. The ceremony itself was relatively simple, involving the youth's first wearing of the adult toga and his registration as a full citizen in the appropriate civic records. However, the celebration that would follow required months of planning and coordination between dozens of different suppliers, entertainers, and service providers. Every detail must be perfect, as the event would be attended by the most influential members of Roman society, each forming judgments that could affect the family's reputation for generations. Marcus listened carefully as Petronius outlined his vision for the celebration. The host wanted something that would demonstrate his family's wealth and taste without appearing ostentatious or vulgar. This balance was crucial in Roman social dynamics, where excessive display could be interpreted as lack of breeding or, worse, political ambition that might threaten the established order. The guest list would include senators, wealthy merchants, distinguished military commanders, and prominent literary figures, creating a social mixture that required careful orchestration to prevent conflicts or embarrassing situations. Marcus's expertise lay not only in organizing the practical aspects of such gatherings, but in understanding the complex web of relationships, rivalries, and alliances that defined Roman high society. They discussed the menu, which would need to satisfy diverse tastes while showcasing ingredients and preparations that demonstrated the host's sophistication and generosity. Roman cuisine had evolved far beyond its rustic origins to incorporate influences from across the Mediterranean world. Greek cooking techniques, Egyptian spices, Gallic wines, and Germanic preserved meats all had their place in the elaborate feasts that marked important social occasions. The entertainment would be equally complex, requiring a careful balance between intellectual stimulation and sensual pleasure. There might be recitations of poetry by fashionable authors, musical performances featuring instruments and styles from various provinces, and displays of dancing that drew from both classical traditions and contemporary innovations. Each element must complement the others while appealing to guests with different educational backgrounds and cultural preferences. Marcus suggested beginning with a reception in Petronius's garden, taking advantage of the season's mild weather and the spectacular landscaping that surrounded the villa. Roman gardens were designed as outdoor rooms, with carefully planned sightlines, strategic placement of sculptures and fountains, and seating areas that encouraged intimate conversation while maintaining appropriate social distances between guests of different ranks. The conversation turned to logistical considerations that would determine the event's success or failure. How many slaves would be needed to serve the guests? What arrangements must be made for transportation, given that many attendees would arrive in litters carried by teams of bearers? How should the various courses be timed to allow for appropriate intervals of conversation and entertainment? These practical matters required the same level of attention as the more glamorous aspects of party planning. Marcus had learned through years of experience that guests remembered uncomfortable seating or poor service far longer than they recalled expensive decorations or exotic foods. The key was creating an atmosphere where everything seemed effortless and natural, concealing the enormous amount of preparation and coordination that made such seamlessness possible. They discussed the appropriate gifts that should be presented to honor the young man whose coming of age was the occasion for the celebration. Roman gift-giving followed elaborate protocols that took into account the relationship between giver and recipient, the relative social status of both parties, and the specific nature of the occasion being marked. Too expensive a gift might embarrass the recipient or imply obligations that could create future complications. The afternoon light was beginning to slant through the atrium's opening as their discussion continued, touching on dozens of details that would need to be resolved in the coming weeks. Marcus made careful notes on his wax tablets, using the stylus to record information that he would later transfer to more permanent papyrus documents in his office. As their meeting concluded, both men expressed satisfaction with the preliminary arrangements. Petronius was confident that Marcus understood his vision and possessed the skills and connections necessary to realize it successfully. Marcus, for his part, was pleased to undertake a project that would allow him to demonstrate his expertise while strengthening his relationships with influential members of Roman society. The Roman Empire functioned as much through personal relationships and social networks as through formal governmental structures, creating a complex web of obligations, favors, and mutual dependencies that shaped every significant decision in both public and private life. Marcus Flavius Antonius had spent decades learning to navigate these intricate social currents, understanding that his success depended as much on whom he knew as on what he could accomplish. After leaving Petronius's villa, Marcus made his way through the city's bustling streets toward the workshop district, where many of the artisans and suppliers essential to his profession maintained their businesses. The afternoon sun cast long shadows between the buildings, creating pockets of coolness that provided relief from the Mediterranean heat. The rhythm of urban life had reached its daily peak, with merchants calling out their wares, children running errands for their parents, and slaves carrying various goods and messages between households. His first stop was at the establishment of Lucius Caecilius, a master craftsman who specialized in creating the elaborate bronze and silver vessels that were essential elements of elegant Roman dining. Caecilius's workshop occupied the ground floor of a substantial building, its interior filled with the warm glow of forge fires and the rhythmic sound of hammers shaping metal into artistic forms. The workspace was organized with the efficiency born of generations of experience in metalworking. Tools hung from wooden pegs driven into the walls, each implement polished from constant use and maintained with the care that professional craftsmen devoted to their equipment. Apprentices worked at stations arranged around the room, learning their trade through careful observation and gradually increasing responsibility under their master's watchful supervision. Caecilius himself was a man in his 50s whose muscular arms and calloused hands testified to decades of physical labor, but whose conversation revealed an education that included literature, mathematics, and natural philosophy. This combination of manual skill and intellectual cultivation was characteristic of Rome's finest artisans, who understood that their work required both technical precision and artistic vision. The two men examined various pieces in different stages of completion, discussing the specific requirements for Petronius's upcoming celebration. Each vessel needed to be not only functional, but also beautiful, with decorative elements that would complement the overall aesthetic of the event, while demonstrating the host's sophisticated taste and considerable wealth. Marcus ran his fingers along the surface of a wine crater that Caecilius was preparing for another client, feeling the subtle textures created by careful chasing and engraving. The vessel depicted scenes from the myth of Dionysus, god of wine and celebration, with figures so carefully rendered that they seemed almost ready to step from the metal surface. This level of craftsmanship required not only technical skill, but deep knowledge of classical literature and mythology. They discussed the timeline for completing the pieces needed for Petronius's celebration, taking into account the various stages of metalworking required to achieve the desired results. The bronze must be carefully alloyed to achieve the proper color and working characteristics, then shaped through a combination of casting, forging, and finishing techniques that had been refined over centuries of Roman craftsmanship. The conversation revealed the complex network of suppliers and specialists that supported Rome's luxury trades. The metal itself came from mines in Spain and Britain, transported to Rome by merchant ships that navigated the dangerous waters of the Mediterranean with cargoes worth small fortunes. The tools used in its working were made by other specialists, who understood the precise qualities required for different metalworking operations. From Caecilius's workshop, Marcus walked to the nearby establishment of Gaius Valerius, a merchant, who specialized in importing exotic foods and spices from the eastern provinces of the empire. Valerius' shop was a sensory wonderland, filled with aromatic treasures gathered from across the known world and carefully preserved for the sophisticated palates of Roman Epicureans. The interior was lined with wooden shelves and bronze containers, holding substances that represented months of dangerous travel and complex commercial negotiations. Peppercorns from India sat next to cinnamon bark from Ceylon, while saffron from Asia Minor shared space with silphium from North Africa, a plant so prized for its supposed medicinal and culinary properties that it was literally worth its weight in gold. Valerius was a man who had traveled extensively in his youth, personally visiting many of the regions from which his merchandise originated. His stories of distant lands and exotic cultures were as much a part of his stock in trade as the physical goods he sold, providing his wealthy customers with the cultural context that made their purchases meaningful expressions of sophistication and worldliness. They discussed the menu for Petronius's celebration, considering how various imported ingredients might be combined with local products to create dishes that would surprise and delight the assembled guests. Roman cuisine at its highest level was an art form that required not only skilled preparation, but also careful consideration of how different flavors, textures, and presentations would work together to create memorable dining experiences. The conversation touched on the seasonal availability of various products, the current state of trade routes that brought goods from distant provinces, and the relative merits of different suppliers who competed for the business of Rome's wealthy elite. This information was crucial for Marcus's planning, as the success of any elaborate celebration depended on obtaining the finest available ingredients at the optimal moment for their use. Marcus's next visit was to the establishment of Marcus Tullius, a wine merchant whose cellar contained vintages from throughout the Mediterranean world. Roman wine culture was highly sophisticated, with connoisseurs capable of distinguishing not only between wines from different regions, but between vintages from different years and even different vineyards within the same district. Tullius's shop was built partially underground, taking advantage of the Earth's natural cooling properties to maintain optimal storage conditions for his valuable inventory. The cellar was lined with amphora, the large clay vessels used for storing and transporting wine, each one carefully labeled with information about its contents, origin, and vintage date. The wine merchant was also something of a philosopher, capable of discussing the cultural and historical significance of different wine-growing regions as well as the technical aspects of viticulture and fermentation. He understood that for his wealthy customers, wine was not merely a beverage but a connection to the broader Roman world and its rich cultural traditions. They tasted several wines that might be appropriate for different courses of Petronius's feast, considering how each would complement specific foods while contributing to the overall progression of flavors throughout the meal. Roman dining was conceived as a complete sensory experience, with each element carefully orchestrated to enhance the others and create lasting memories for the participants. The afternoon was advancing as Marcus completed his rounds of suppliers and artisans, each conversation adding layers of detail to his mental picture of how Petronius's celebration would unfold. The complexity of coordinating so many different elements required not only organizational skills, but deep knowledge of Roman social customs and aesthetic principles. As the shadows lengthened across Rome's ancient streets, Marcus found himself contemplating the intricate social choreography that would soon unfold at Petronius's villa. The Roman approach to celebration was far more sophisticated than simple entertainment or dining. It was a carefully constructed experience designed to reinforce social bonds, display cultural refinement, and create lasting memories that would influence relationships and reputations for years to come. The concept of pleasure in Roman society was deeply philosophical, influenced by Greek traditions that viewed aesthetic enjoyment as a path to wisdom and moral development. This was not the hedonistic pursuit of immediate gratification that later critics would attribute to Roman culture, but rather a thoughtful exploration of how beauty, comfort, and sensory delight could enhance human understanding and social harmony. Marcus returned to his own villa as the day's heat began to subside, the Mediterranean sun casting warm golden light across the red-tiled roofs and marble facades of his neighborhood. The Aventin Hill offered spectacular views across the city, and from his garden terrace, he could see the smoke from countless cooking fires beginning to rise as households throughout Rome prepared their evening meals. His house, though modest, compared to the senatorial mansions he frequented professionally, reflected the same aesthetic principles that guided Roman architecture throughout the empire. Every space was designed to serve both practical and spiritual needs, creating environments that nurtured both physical comfort and intellectual contemplation. The central courtyard was designed around a fountain that provided both visual beauty and the soothing sound of moving water. The basin was lined with mosaics depicting marine life, their colors chosen to evoke the cool depths of the sea and provide psychological relief from the urban environment's intensity. Around the fountain, carefully tended plants created a miniature landscape that brought natural beauty into the heart of the domestic space. Marcus's personal study adjoined the courtyard, its walls lined with wooden shelves holding papyrus scrolls containing works of literature, philosophy, and practical knowledge accumulated over decades of reading and learning. Roman education emphasized the interconnection between different fields of knowledge, encouraging students to see relationships between poetry and mathematics, history and natural philosophy, rhetoric and engineering. As evening approached, Marcus reviewed his notes from the day's meetings and began sketching preliminary plans for Petronius's celebration. The process required balancing numerous competing considerations: the host's desires and budget, the expectations of various guests, the seasonal availability of ingredients and entertainers, and the countless logistical details that could make or break such an elaborate event. The Roman dinner party, or convivium, was governed by elaborate protocols that had evolved over centuries of social development. The arrangement of guests on dining couches communicated subtle messages about relationships and hierarchies, while the progression of courses was designed to create a narrative arc that would engage both palate and intellect throughout the evening. The traditional Roman dining room, or triclinium, was arranged around 3 couches positioned to form a U-shape, with each couch accommodating 3 diners who reclined on their left sides while eating with their right hands. This arrangement facilitated conversation while maintaining appropriate social distances between guests of different ranks and relationships. The menu would need to balance novelty with tradition, incorporating exotic ingredients and preparation techniques while respecting the fundamental Roman preference for foods that were both delicious and symbolically meaningful. Each course would be selected not only for its intrinsic qualities, but for how it would interact with the wines being served and contribute to the overall dining experience. Marcus considered the entertainment that would accompany the meal, understanding that Roman dinner parties were multimedia experiences that engaged all the senses. Musicians might perform on instruments brought from various provinces, their repertoires including both classical Greek compositions and contemporary works that reflected the cosmopolitan nature of imperial culture. Poetry recitations were particularly popular among educated Romans, who appreciated both the intellectual content of literary works and the skill required for effective oral presentation. The choice of poems would need to reflect the occasion's significance while appealing to guests with different educational backgrounds and literary preferences. Dancing was another important element, though it required careful consideration of the audience's sensibilities. Roman attitudes toward dance were complex, influenced by both Greek aesthetic traditions and indigenous Italian customs. The performances needed to be sophisticated enough to engage cultured viewers while avoiding anything that might be considered inappropriate for respectable company. The evening's progression would be carefully orchestrated to maintain energy and interest while allowing for the natural ebb and flow of conversation and social interaction. Marcus had learned through experience that the most successful celebrations were those that seemed effortless and spontaneous while actually following carefully planned sequences of activities and entertainments. The physical environment would play a crucial role in creating the desired atmosphere. Lighting would be provided by carefully positioned oil lamps and torches, their flames creating warm, flickering illumination that flattered both people and surroundings. The Romans understood that lighting could dramatically affect mood and perception, using it as a tool for creating specific emotional responses. Floral decorations would be arranged to provide visual beauty while contributing pleasant fragrances to the air. Roman gardens produced flowers throughout most of the year, and skilled florists knew how to combine different varieties to create arrangements that would remain attractive throughout an entire evening's festivities. The serving staff would need to be carefully trained in the specific protocols appropriate for such an elaborate occasion. Roman servants were expected to be nearly invisible, anticipating guests' needs while never intruding on conversations or drawing attention to themselves. This required not only technical skill but deep understanding of social dynamics and individual preferences. Marcus spent considerable time considering the gifts that would be presented to young Marcus Petronius Maximus in honor of his coming of age. Roman gift-giving was a complex art form that communicated messages about relationships, expectations, and future obligations. Each present needed to be appropriate for the recipient's new status as an adult citizen, while reflecting the giver's own position and intentions. As the sun set over the eternal city, casting long shadows across the forum and basilicas that formed the heart of Roman public life, Marcus felt the familiar satisfaction that came from contemplating a complex project in its early stages. The challenge of coordinating so many different elements into a harmonious whole appealed to his love of both artistic creation and practical problem-solving. The sounds of evening began to replace those of the day. The calling of vendors selling prepared foods to families who lacked cooking facilities, the conversations of friends meeting in wine shops and taverns, the distant music from various entertainment venues scattered throughout the city. Rome never truly slept, but it did change its rhythm as darkness fell and different aspects of urban life came to the foreground. The Roman night possessed a quality entirely different from our modern experience of darkness. Without electric lighting to banish shadows or mechanical sounds to fill the air, evening brought a natural transition to quieter, more contemplative activities that allowed the mind to process the day's accumulated experiences and prepare for restorative sleep. Marcus's villa settled into its nighttime rhythm as household slaves completed their final tasks and retired to their quarters. The oil lamps cast dancing shadows on the painted walls, creating an ever-changing display of light and darkness that transformed familiar spaces into something mysterious and beautiful. The fountain in the central courtyard continued its gentle murmuring, a sound that seemed to grow more prominent as other noises faded with the approaching night. The master of the house made his way to his private study, where he often spent the evening hours reading, writing, or simply contemplating the day's events and tomorrow's challenges. The room was his personal sanctuary, filled with the accumulated treasures of a lifetime devoted to learning and aesthetic appreciation. The walls were lined with wooden shelves holding papyrus scrolls, containing works by the greatest authors of both Greek and Roman literature. Homer's epic sat alongside Virgil's Aeneid, while the philosophical works of Plato and Aristotle shared space with the more practical writings of Cicero and Seneca. This collection represented not merely personal entertainment, but the intellectual foundation upon which Roman culture was built. Marcus selected a scroll containing the Meditations of Emperor Marcus Aurelius, whose philosophical reflections on duty, mortality, and the proper conduct of life had provided comfort and guidance to countless Romans seeking wisdom in an uncertain world. The emperor's thoughts on the transient nature of earthly pleasures and the importance of maintaining equanimity in both success and failure seem particularly relevant as Marcus contemplated his own profession and its place in the broader scheme of human existence. The act of reading by lamplight required patience and attention that modern readers rarely experience. The flickering flame created constantly changing patterns of illumination on the papyrus surface, while the reader's eyes had to adjust continually to variations in brightness and shadow. This slower, more meditative approach to text encouraged deeper reflection on meaning and significance rather than rapid consumption of information. As Marcus read, his mind wandered to the philosophical implications of his work organizing celebrations for Rome's wealthy elite. The Stoic tradition emphasized the importance of accepting one's role in society, while maintaining inner freedom from external circumstances. Was his profession merely pandering to vanity and excess, or did it serve a higher purpose in maintaining the social bonds that held civilization together? The Roman understanding of pleasure was more nuanced than later Christian critics would acknowledge. The concept of otium, or cultivated leisure, was considered essential for intellectual and spiritual development. The celebrations that Marcus organized were not merely indulgent entertainments but carefully constructed experiences designed to nurture friendship, promote cultural exchange, and create opportunities for philosophical discussion among educated citizens. The evening air carried the mingled scents of cooking fires, flowering plants, and the subtle perfumes that Romans used to enhance their personal and domestic environments. From his study window, Marcus could see the lights of other households scattered across the hillside, each one representing a family engaged in their own evening routines of dining, conversation, and gradual preparation for sleep. The Roman conception of time was fundamentally different from our modern chronological precision. Hours were measured by natural phenomena rather than mechanical devices, creating a more organic relationship between human activity and natural rhythms. The approach of night was signaled by the gradual fading of light, the calling of evening, birds returning to their roosts, and the subtle changes in temperature and humidity that marked the transition from day to night. Marcus's household slaves had completed their evening duties and withdrawn to their quarters, leaving the villa in the peaceful quiet that characterized Roman domestic life after sunset. The relationship between master and slave in educated households was often more complex than modern assumptions might suggest, involving elements of mutual respect and shared cultural values that transcended legal categories of ownership and servitude. The philosophical schools of ancient Rome offered various approaches to understanding life's meaning and purpose. The Epicureans taught that pleasure, properly understood, was the highest good, but they defined pleasure as freedom from pain and anxiety rather than active sensual gratification. The Stoics emphasized duty, rational acceptance of fate, and emotional equilibrium in the face of changing circumstances. Both traditions influenced Roman thinking about how to live well in an uncertain world. As Marcus continued reading by the gentle light of his oil lamp, he found himself drawn into the timeless wisdom that had guided human beings for centuries before his birth, and would continue to offer comfort and insight long after his death. The emperor's words spoke across the centuries with a voice that seemed both authoritative and compassionate, offering perspective on the daily concerns that occupied most human attention. The concept of memento mori, remembering death, was not morbid in Roman culture, but rather a source of clarity and motivation. By acknowledging the temporary nature of all earthly existence, individuals could focus on what truly mattered: relationships with family and friends, contributions to the common good, and the cultivation of virtue and wisdom that would outlast physical life. The night sounds of Rome created a gentle symphony that accompanied Marcus's reading. Distant conversations from nearby houses, the soft footsteps of late travelers on cobblestone streets, the occasional call of night birds, and the ever-present whisper of wind through the cypress and olive trees that dotted the urban landscape. These sounds formed a comforting backdrop that connected individual contemplation to the broader life of the city. Roman architecture was designed to enhance the natural transitions between day and night, with carefully planned openings that allowed moonlight and starlight to enter interior spaces in patterns that changed with the seasons. The central courtyard of Marcus's villa was particularly beautiful on clear nights, when the fountain's surface reflected the celestial bodies above and created a sense of connection between earthly and heavenly realms. The practice of evening reflection was common among educated Romans, who understood that the day's experiences needed to be processed and integrated before peaceful sleep could be achieved. This might involve reviewing one's actions and decisions, considering lessons learned from interactions with others, or simply allowing the mind to wander freely through memories and associations that arose spontaneously in the quiet darkness. Marcus set aside his reading as the night deepened, feeling the natural drowsiness that came with the completion of another day's work and contemplation. The oil lamp's flame danced gently in the still air, casting shifting patterns of light and shadow on the walls while gradually consuming its fuel in service of human comfort and enlightenment. The transition from waking consciousness to sleep was understood by ancient Romans as a journey between different realms of existence, each with its own laws and possibilities. As Marcus prepared for rest, his mind gradually released its grip on the day's practical concerns and opened itself to the mysterious processes that would restore his body and spirit during the hours of darkness. The bedroom in his villa was designed according to principles that balanced comfort with spiritual symbolism. The walls were painted with scenes of peaceful landscapes that would encourage pleasant dreams, while the bed itself was positioned to take advantage of favorable air currents that would promote healthy sleep. Roman medical theory emphasized the importance of proper breathing during rest, believing that the quality of sleep depended largely on the purity and movement of air in sleeping chambers. The bed frame was made of aromatic cedar wood that released subtle fragrances believed to promote restful sleep and ward off insects that might disturb slumber. The mattress was stuffed with a carefully chosen mixture of wool, feathers, and dried herbs selected for their soporific properties. Roman physicians had developed sophisticated understanding of how different materials and scents could influence the quality and character of sleep. As Marcus settled into his bed, arranged with linen sheets that had been washed in water scented with lavender and dried in Mediterranean sunshine, his thoughts naturally turned to the broader patterns of existence that connected his individual life to the eternal cycles of nature and history. The Roman worldview encompassed vast spans of time and space, seeing individual human lives as part of cosmic processes that repeated endlessly across generations and millennia. The concept of the Golden Age was deeply embedded in Roman consciousness, representing a time of perfect harmony between human beings and the natural world. Though this era was understood to lie in the distant past, its memory served as both inspiration and standard against which contemporary life could be measured. The celebrations that Marcus organized represented attempts to recreate, however briefly, something approaching that primordial perfection. The Roman understanding of dreams was complex and multifaceted, drawing from Greek philosophical traditions, indigenous Italian folk beliefs, and religious practices imported from various provinces of the empire. Dreams were seen as messages from the gods, windows into future possibilities, or reflections of the soul's deepest concerns and desires. Professional dream interpreters practiced their art in temples and marketplaces, offering to decode the symbolic language of sleep visions. As consciousness began to fade, Marcus's awareness expanded beyond the confines of his individual identity to encompass the vast historical forces that had shaped his world. The Roman Empire represented the culmination of centuries of cultural development, military conquest, and administrative innovation that had brought unprecedented peace and prosperity to the Mediterranean world. The Pax Romana, or Roman peace, was not merely the absence of war, but a positive condition of cultural flowering that allowed arts, literature, philosophy, and commerce to flourish throughout the known world. The celebrations that Marcus organized were small but significant expressions of this broader cultural achievement, bringing together people from different backgrounds in harmonious appreciation of beauty and refinement. The night sky above Rome was brilliant with stars unobscured by artificial light, displaying the same constellations that had guided sailors, farmers, and philosophers for thousands of years. Roman astronomy was sophisticated, incorporating Greek mathematical understanding with practical observations that allowed accurate prediction of celestial events and seasonal changes. The 12-hour Roman night was divided into watches, each associated with different spiritual and practical activities. The first watch, from sunset to approximately 9 o'clock, was devoted to family time and private reflection. The second watch, from 9 until midnight, was traditionally reserved for intimate gatherings and personal study. The third watch, from midnight to 3 in the morning, was considered the most spiritually significant, when the veil between earthly and divine realms was thinnest. The fourth and final watch, from 3 until sunrise, was associated with preparation for the new day and renewed engagement with worldly responsibilities. Marcus's breathing gradually deepened and slowed as his body entered the restorative phases of sleep. Roman physicians understood that sleep was not a passive state, but an active process during which the body repaired itself and the mind processed the day's accumulated experiences. They recommended specific sleeping positions, dietary practices, and environmental conditions that would optimize these natural healing processes. The villa itself seemed to settle into its own nocturnal rhythm, with subtle creaking sounds as wooden beams expanded and contracted with changing temperature, and gentle movements of air currents that carried the scents of night-blooming flowers through corridors and chambers. Roman architecture was designed to work in harmony with natural processes, creating living environments that responded organically to seasonal and daily cycles. The Roman concept of fate, or fatum, encompassed both individual destiny and cosmic necessity, suggesting that personal choices operated within larger patterns that were both meaningful and inevitable. This understanding provided comfort during times of uncertainty, while encouraging individuals to fulfill their roles with dignity and purpose, knowing that their actions contributed to purposes greater than immediate personal satisfaction. As sleep deepened, Marcus's consciousness merged with the timeless patterns of rest and renewal that connected all living beings to the fundamental rhythms of existence. His individual concerns dissolved into broader currents of peace and restoration that flowed through the Roman world and beyond, linking his personal experience to the eternal cycles of nature and history. The household spirits, or lares, that Romans believed protected domestic spaces were thought to be most active during the night hours, watching over sleeping family members and ensuring that dreams would be pleasant and restorative. These benevolent presences represented the accumulated wisdom and protection of ancestral generations, creating a sense of continuity that connected individual lives to the broader streams of family and cultural tradition. Roman prayer practices included evening devotions that acknowledged the day's blessings, while requesting protection and guidance during the vulnerable hours of sleep. These rituals were not merely superstitious observances, but expressions of philosophical understanding about humanity's place in a cosmos that was both mysterious and fundamentally benevolent. The process of falling asleep was understood as a gradual release of conscious control, allowing deeper wisdom and healing processes to operate without interference from the rational mind's constant activity. This surrender required trust in natural processes that had sustained human life for countless generations, connecting individual experience to the broader patterns of existence that encompassed all living beings. In the deepest hours of the Roman night, when even the bustling eternal city had settled into relative quiet, the realm of sleep opened its mysterious gates to receive another soul seeking rest and renewal. The Roman god Morpheus, son of Somnus and master of dreams, was believed to shape the visions that visited sleeping minds, weaving together memory, desire, and divine inspiration into the complex tapestries that played behind closed eyelids. Marcus had entered that liminal space between waking and sleeping, where consciousness becomes fluid and permeable, allowing thoughts and sensations to flow together in patterns that follow dream logic rather than rational organization. The comfortable weight of woolen blankets, the subtle fragrance of lavender that had been woven into the bed linens, and the gentle sound of the fountain in the central courtyard created a sensory environment that encouraged the deepest and most restorative forms of sleep. The Roman understanding of sleep recognized different levels and qualities of rest, from light dozing that refreshed the body without completely suspending awareness, to the profound unconsciousness that allowed complete physical and spiritual regeneration. The deepest sleep was considered sacred, a time when the soul temporarily left the physical body to commune with divine forces and receive wisdom that could not be accessed through ordinary consciousness. The villa breathed quietly around its sleeping master, the architecture itself designed to promote healthy rest through careful attention to air circulation, temperature regulation, and acoustic properties that filtered out disturbing sounds while allowing beneficial ones to pass through. Roman builders understood that good sleep required more than comfortable bedding. The entire environment needed to support the natural processes of physical and mental restoration. In his dreams, Marcus found himself walking through landscapes that combined familiar Roman settings with impossible architectural elements that could exist only in the realm of sleep. Marble columns stretched impossibly high into cloudy skies, while gardens bloomed with flowers that changed color as he watched, their perfume shifting from rose to jasmine to exotic scents that had no earthly counterparts. The dream narrative wove together elements from his professional life with deeper symbolic content that spoke to universal human concerns about beauty, mortality, and meaning. He found himself organizing a celebration that seemed to extend through vast halls filled with guests from different historical periods, all enjoying conversations that bridge centuries and cultures with the effortless communication that characterizes dream experience. Roman dream theory suggested that such visions were not random neurological events, but meaningful communications from divine sources, offering guidance, warning, or simply the pleasure of experiencing beauty and harmony beyond the limitations of waking life. Professional dream interpreters studied the symbolic language of sleep visions, understanding that the mind during rest operated according to different principles than rational thought. The physiological processes of sleep were gradually restoring Marcus's body for another day of activity and engagement with the world. Roman physicians had observed that sleep was essential not only for physical health, but for emotional equilibrium and intellectual clarity. They recommended specific practices and environmental conditions that would optimize these natural healing processes. The night air carried sounds that penetrated even into sleep, the distant barking of dogs, the occasional clatter of hoofbeats on cobblestones as late travelers made their way through the city, the soft hooting of owls that nested in the cypress trees surrounding Roman villas. These sounds became woven into dream narratives, transformed by sleeping consciousness into elements that served the story's symbolic purposes. Roman timekeeping during night hours relied on natural phenomena rather than mechanical precision, creating a more organic relationship between human rest and cosmic rhythms. The position of stars, the quality of moonlight, and subtle changes in temperature and humidity marked the passage of time in ways that harmonized with biological processes, rather than imposing artificial schedules on natural patterns. The concept of the night watch was both practical and spiritual, recognizing that different hours of darkness were appropriate for different activities and states of consciousness. The deepest sleep typically occurred during the middle watches, when both individual and collective energy was at its lowest ebb, allowing for the most profound forms of rest and renewal. Marcus's breathing had settled into the slow, regular rhythm that characterizes deep sleep, his body's systems operating with the automatic efficiency that requires no conscious direction or control. The Roman understanding of health emphasized the importance of allowing natural processes to function without interference, trusting in the wisdom of the body to heal and restore itself when given appropriate conditions. The household spirits that Romans believed protected domestic spaces were thought to be particularly active during the sleep hours, ensuring that dreams would be beneficial and that the sleeping family would be protected from both physical and spiritual dangers. These benevolent presences represented the accumulated protection of ancestral generations, creating a sense of safety that allowed complete relaxation and surrender to unconscious processes. Roman philosophy offered various perspectives on the meaning and significance of sleep, with some schools viewing it as a temporary death that prepared the soul for its eventual separation from the body, while others saw it as a source of renewed energy and inspiration that connected individual consciousness to universal creative forces. Both approaches emphasized the sacred nature of rest and the importance of creating conditions that supported healthy sleep. The progression through different phases of sleep was understood to follow natural patterns that aligned with cosmic rhythms, connecting individual rest to the broader cycles of renewal that sustained all life. The deepest sleep occurred when these personal and universal rhythms were most perfectly synchronized, creating opportunities for healing and transformation that were impossible during waking hours. As the night advanced toward its deepest point, Marcus's consciousness had fully surrendered to the ancient processes of restoration and renewal. His individual identity temporarily dissolved into the timeless patterns of rest that connected him to all sleeping beings throughout the Roman world and beyond. In this state of complete relaxation, his body and spirit were free to engage in the mysterious work of healing and regeneration that prepared him for another day of engagement with life's endless possibilities and challenges. In the pre-dawn hours, when the Roman world rested in the deepest embrace of night, the eternal city seemed to exist outside of time itself, suspended in a state of peaceful equilibrium that connected the sleeping present to the dreaming past and the approaching future. The darkness was complete but not empty, filled with the subtle sounds and scents that marked the transition between night's deepest point and the gradual return of light. Marcus lay in profound slumber, his breathing so slow and regular that it seemed to merge with the other gentle rhythms that pulsed through his villa and the surrounding neighborhood. The fountain in the central courtyard continued its quiet murmuring, a sound that had become so deeply embedded in his consciousness that it formed part of the background harmony of his dreams. The lavender-scented linens that surrounded him held the warmth of his body while allowing the cool night air to circulate freely, creating the perfect conditions for restorative sleep. The Roman conception of time during the night hours was fluid and organic, measured not by mechanical precision, but by the subtle changes in energy and atmosphere that marked the progression from evening through midnight toward the eventual return of dawn. Each phase of the night brought its own character and quality, with the deepest hours offering opportunities for the most profound forms of rest and spiritual renewal. In the realm of dreams, Marcus continued to move through landscapes that combined the familiar architecture of Rome with impossible beauties that could exist only in the mind's creative theater. Gardens bloomed with eternal spring, their flowers releasing fragrances that spoke directly to the soul without requiring the mediation of physical senses. Conversations unfolded with friends both living and departed, their words carrying wisdom that transcended the limitations of ordinary discourse. The villa itself participated in the night's restorative processes, its stone and marble slowly releasing the day's accumulated warmth while drawing cooling moisture from the evening air. Roman architects had designed these buildings to work in harmony with natural cycles, creating living environments that breathed with the seasons and supported the health and comfort of their inhabitants through careful attention to subtle environmental factors. The household slaves rested in their quarters, their own dreams perhaps carrying them back to childhood homes in distant provinces, or forward to imagined futures when they might achieve freedom and establish their own households. Roman slavery, while fundamentally unjust by modern standards, often involved complex relationships of mutual dependence and affection that created bonds, extending far beyond legal categories of ownership and property. The city's guardian spirits, both official deities honored in public temples and household gods who protected individual families, were believed to be particularly active during the night hours. These benevolent presences wove themselves through the dreams of sleeping citizens, offering protection, guidance, and sometimes prophetic visions that would influence important decisions in the waking world. As the night reached its deepest point, somewhere around the third watch according to Roman timekeeping, the entire Mediterranean world seemed suspended in a moment of perfect balance between the day's activities and tomorrow's possibilities. In this profound quiet, individual consciousness could merge with the larger rhythms of existence, experiencing a unity and peace that was difficult to achieve amid the demands and distractions of ordinary waking life. The quality of darkness at this hour was different from the early evening's gentle twilight or the morning's gradual brightening. This was the deep night that existed for its own sake, not as a transition between days, but as a complete and meaningful experience in itself. Roman culture recognized the value of this darkness, understanding that certain forms of wisdom and healing could only occur in the absence of light and activity. Marcus's body had completed several cycles of the deepest sleep, each one allowing different systems to repair and restore themselves, according to natural patterns that had evolved over countless generations of human existence. His muscles relaxed completely, his breathing slowed to its most efficient rhythm, and his heart rate settled into the steady pace that would sustain him through the remaining hours of rest. The Roman understanding of health emphasized the crucial importance of allowing these natural processes to function without interference. Sleep was not seen as a mere pause in productive activity, but as an essential component of human flourishing that required careful attention and respect. The conditions surrounding rest, the quality of air, the comfort of bedding, the absence of disturbing sounds or lights, were considered as important as nutrition and exercise for maintaining physical and spiritual well-being. Roman physicians had observed that the deepest sleep typically occurred during the middle hours of the night, when the body's natural rhythms were most perfectly aligned with cosmic cycles. They recommended practices and environmental modifications that would support these natural patterns, understanding that good health depended on harmony between individual needs and universal principles. The progression of dreams during this deep phase of sleep often took on mythological or archetypal character, as the sleeping mind gained access to patterns of meaning and significance that transcended personal experience. Marcus might find himself conversing with gods and heroes, participating in rituals that connected him to the fundamental forces of existence, or simply resting in landscapes of perfect beauty that nourished his soul with their harmony and peace. The approaching dawn was still hours away, but even in the deepest darkness, subtle changes in the atmosphere began to prepare for the eventual return of light. The night sounds gradually shifted from the purely nocturnal to those that bridged the gap between darkness and day. The air began its slow circulation toward the patterns that would support the morning's activities, while maintaining the stillness that allowed continued rest for those who needed it. Roman culture valued this transition time, understanding that the most profound rest often occurred just before dawn, when consciousness was most completely released from the day's concerns and open to the restorative influences that could only operate in complete relaxation. This was the time for the deepest healing, the most meaningful dreams, and the most complete restoration of energy and purpose. As Marcus continued his journey through the peaceful depths of sleep, his individual rest became part of the larger pattern of renewal that was occurring throughout the Roman world. In countless households across the empire, other souls were engaged in their own processes of restoration and regeneration, creating a vast network of shared rest that supported the continued flourishing of human civilization. The eternal city slept on, wrapped in the gentle embrace of night, while the timeless processes of healing and renewal worked their ancient magic in the darkness. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and opportunities, but for now, there was only the perfect peace of deep sleep, the sacred darkness that restored both body and spirit, and the quiet confidence that dawn would return in its proper time, bringing with it the energy and clarity needed for another day of life's endless adventure. In this profound rest, the boundaries between individual and universal, temporal and eternal, gradually dissolved into the peaceful unity that characterizes the deepest forms of sleep. Marcus, like countless others throughout the Roman world, surrendered completely to these ancient rhythms of restoration, trusting in the wisdom of processes that connected his personal rest to the cosmic cycles that sustained all existence. And in that surrender, he found the perfect peace that prepared him for whatever wonders and challenges the returning light might bring.